My name is Kate Bennett. I am 32 years old and I am a Superior Court judge. But my family still thinks I am the pregnant, desperate 17-year-old they threw out into the cold. 15 years ago, I was sleeping in a beat-up sedan because my parents changed the locks on my childhood home. Yesterday, they found out my grandparents left me $2 million, and they decided to drag me to court to take every penny. They stood in the courtroom smirking, waiting for the legal system to absolutely destroy my life. But their arrogant lawyer took one look at me, dropped his heavy briefcase, went completely pale, and stuttered, "Good morning, Judge." They had no idea that the legal system they were trying to use against me was actually my domain. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth and intelligence. The nightmare began on a peaceful Sunday morning. My 15-year-old son Leo and I were sitting at a quiet corner table of an upscale brunch cafe downtown. We were laughing over our pancakes when a thick manila envelope slammed down onto our table with a violent smack. The sudden impact knocked over my glass of iced water, soaking the edge of the white tablecloth and splashing onto Leo's jacket. I calmly looked up to see Jamal, my brother-in-law. Jamal is an African-American man who prides himself on projecting extreme wealth, though most of it is a cheap illusion. He was standing over our table, practically vibrating with unearned arrogance. He was wearing an oversized, flashy designer suit with a loud pattern that screamed desperation, complete with a chunky gold Rolex that I knew for a fact was a knockoff. He sneered down at us, deliberately making sure his booming voice was loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "You have been served," Kate Jamal announced, dragging out my name with pure venom. "Did you honestly believe you could just sneak away with $2 million of our family money and we would not find out?" I reached for a cloth napkin and slowly began dabbing the spilled water away from my son. Leo looked at Jamal, his jaw tightening in defense of me, but he stayed quiet, just like I had taught him. Jamal took my silence as fear. He leaned closer, resting his hands heavily on our table, invading our personal space and breathing his stale coffee breath into my face. "That envelope right there is a subpoena," Jamal declared, gesturing wildly to the soaked folder. "We know all about the secret trust fund your grandparents left behind. $2 million. You really thought you could manipulate two sick elderly people into leaving their fortune to the family disgrace. My wife is the rightful heir. Your parents are the rightful heirs. We hired the most ruthless shark lawyer in the entire state. We are taking all of it, every single cent." People at the tables around us were starting to stare, their forks hovering over their plates. A hush fell over the cafe. Jamal noticed the captive audience and his chest puffed out even further. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with absolute disgust as he took in my simple beige cashmere sweater and minimal makeup. "Look at you," he mocked, letting out a harsh, cruel laugh. "You are still dressing like a broke waitress drowning in student loans. What did you think you were going to do with $2 million anyway? Buy a slightly nicer trailer park? You are nothing but a high school dropout who got knocked up and ruined her life. You have been scraping the bottom of the barrel for 15 years, and now you want to steal from the people who actually made something of themselves. I run a highly successful crypto real estate empire, and you are just a pathetic mistake trying to cash a check you do not deserve." He pointed a finger directly at my face, a cruel, satisfied smirk twisting his features. "We are going to expose everything in court, Kate. Every dirty little secret. We are going to drag your trashy past out for the whole world to see. By the time our lawyer is done with you, you will be back to serving coffee and begging for loose change on the street. You will be homeless again, exactly where you belong." I remained perfectly still, letting his toxic words hang in the heavy air. I did not raise my voice to argue. I did not cry or show weakness. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break under his public humiliation. I just smiled because I knew a secret that was going to completely destroy his fake empire and leave him begging for mercy in my courtroom. Before Jamal could even take a single breath to continue his ridiculous speech, two more figures stepped out from the morning crowd and flanked his sides. It was my toxic parents, Patricia and Richard. They looked exactly as I remembered, still desperate to maintain an image of upper-class perfection that they could no longer afford. My mother wore her signature tennis bracelet and a stiff practice scowl, while my father adjusted the collar of his expensive but horribly outdated golf shirt. They stood over my table like a tribunal, their eyes burning with a mixture of greed and absolute hatred. Patricia slammed her heavy designer purse onto the table right next to the soaked legal envelope. She leaned in close, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "I threw you out into the snow at 17 because your teenage pregnancy was a disgrace to this family's country club reputation," she hissed, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant. "Do not think for a second that I regret it. And you really thought you could manipulate my parents into giving you our money after what you did to us?" My father. Richard immediately stepped forward to back her up. He puffed out his chest and looked around at the other patrons, clearly playing to the audience. "We gave you everything, Kate," he declared, adopting the tone of a deeply wounded and betrayed patriarch. "We gave you a beautiful home, we paid for your private school, and you repaid us by getting pregnant and ruining our social standing. You broke your mother's heart. We had to cut you off for your own good to teach you a lesson. And this is how you repay us, by sneaking behind our backs and stealing our rightful inheritance." I watched his pathetic theatrical performance. The truth was that my parents were drowning in credit card debt because they refused to live within their means. They spent their entire lives trying to impress people who did not even like them. Now they were staring at a $2 million lifeline that had just slipped through their fingers, and they were furious. Patricia turned to the crowded cafe, dramatically raising her hand to her chest. "She is a thief," my mother announced to the horrified onlookers. My parents were deeply sick. They suffered from severe dementia in their final years. They could barely remember their own names, let alone understand complex financial documents. This girl, my own estranged daughter, preyed on their vulnerable state. She slithered back into their lives while we were busy working, manipulated their fragile minds, and forced them to rewrite their trust fund behind our backs. It is elder abuse, plain and simple. A few older people in the cafe gasped, whispering to each other. Jamal nodded vigorously, crossing his arms and glaring at me. "That is right," Jamal chimed in. "She is a fraud. We have medical records proving her grandparents were not of sound mind. We are taking this to probate court and the judge is going to throw the book at her. She will be lucky if she does not end up in a federal prison for exploiting the elderly." I sat perfectly still, gently squeezing Leo's hand under the table to reassure him. I did not bother explaining to the cafe audience that my grandparents were brilliant, sharp, and entirely lucid until the very end. I did not mention that they had secretly attended my law school graduation while my parents were off on a luxury cruise they financed with high-interest loans. My grandparents knew exactly who I was and what I had built. They changed their will because they saw my parents draining their accounts to fund a fake lifestyle, and they wanted their hard-earned wealth protected. "You are unusually quiet," Patricia taunted, her lips curling into a triumphant, ugly smile. "What is the matter? Has the reality of your situation finally set in? You thought you were so smart, sneaking around nursing homes and tricking sick old people. But you are not smart. You are just a manipulative little dropout who got caught." Richard leaned across the table, his face red with anger. "You are going to sign that money over to us by Friday," he ordered, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "If you fight this, we will ruin whatever pathetic little life you have managed to scrape together. We will expose you. We will tell your boss what you did. We will make sure you never find work in this state again. You will be back on the streets where you started sleeping in your car." Patricia grabbed her purse, looking down at me as if I were a stain on her expensive shoes. "You have until the end of the week, Kate. Make the smart choice for once in your miserable life. Otherwise, we will gladly destroy you in court." Before I could formulate a response to my mother, a fourth shadow fell across our table. It was my 34-year-old sister Amanda, the golden child. Amanda had always been the family favorite, the one who supposedly did everything right. She married Jamal, bought a house they could not afford, and spent her days trying to become a social media influencer. She was dripping in designer logos, though I could easily spot the rental tags tucked inside the collar of her jacket. Amanda did not even look at me. Instead, she fixed her venomous gaze directly on my 15-year-old son. Leo had been sitting so quietly, trying to remain invisible, but Amanda leaned down her face inches from his, an ugly sneer twisting her perfectly contoured features. "So this is the $2 million mistake," Amanda said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You know, Leo, your mother ruined our entire family just to have you. She was a selfish, reckless teenager who brought shame to our name, and now she is using you as an excuse to steal the money that belongs to me. Does she tell you that? Does she tell you that every bite of food you eat is paid for with stolen family funds?" My blood ran ice cold. Attacking me was one thing, but targeting my son crossed a line that no one came back from. However, I did not scream. I did not throw my water glass at her. Years of sitting on the judge bench had trained me to maintain absolute composure in the face of erratic behavior. Anger is a weakness in a courtroom, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I calmly stood up, shifting my body to form a physical barrier between my sister and my son. I placed a firm, protective hand on Leo's shoulder. I looked Amanda dead in the eyes. Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second under my icy stare. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and bypassed dialing altogether. I simply raised my hand and made direct eye contact with the cafe manager, who had been watching the commotion nervously from the hostess stand. I gestured for him to approach. He hurried over, looking terrified of the chaotic scene my family had created. "Excuse me," I said to the manager, my tone perfectly level and authoritative. "These 4 individuals are not seated at this table. They are trespassing, causing a public disturbance, and actively harassing a minor. I would like them escorted off the premises immediately, or I will be forced to contact law enforcement to file a formal report for criminal harassment." The manager nodded quickly, turning to my parents and sister. "Sir, ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave the restaurant right now," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You are disturbing the other guests. Please step away from the table." Jamal threw his head back and let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. He clapped his hands slowly, mockingly. "Oh, look at her," Jamal jeered. "Look at the little dropout trying to act tough, calling the manager." "Really? Are you going to ask him to fire us? You are pathetic, Kate. You think a cafe manager is going to save you from what is coming?" Jamal shoved his hands into the pockets of his tacky suit. "We do not need to stay in this cheap diner anyway," he bragged, puffing out his chest. "We accomplished what we came to do. You have been served. And just so you know exactly what you are up against, we hired Bradley. Do you even know who that is? Or do you only read comic books? Bradley is the most ruthless shark lawyer in the entire state. He destroys people for fun. He charges more per hour than you make in a year." Jamal leaned in close, ignoring the manager who was weakly asking him to step back. "Bradley is going to freeze your bank accounts by Tuesday," Jamal promised, his eyes wide with manic excitement. "He is going to dig up every single embarrassing detail of your pathetic little life. When he is finished with you, you are going to be living in a cardboard box. We are going to leave you homeless again, just like we did 15 years ago, and this time, nobody is going to come to save you." Amanda laughed, linking her arm through Jamal's. "Come on, honey," she said dismissively. "The smell of desperation is ruining my appetite. Let us go celebrate our incoming inheritance." My parents followed suit, Richard giving me one last warning glare, while Patricia adjusted her purse strap with a smug smile. They turned and marched out of the restaurant like conquering heroes, leaving the soaked subpoena on the table. They had no idea that their theatrical exit was just the beginning of their own massive downfall. The heavy silence in the restaurant was deafening after my family finally walked out the glass doors. The cafe manager let out a long breath and turned to me, his face pale and apologetic. I held up a hand before he could even speak, signaling that an apology was not necessary. It was not his fault that my relatives lacked basic human decency. I picked up the soaking wet manila envelope from the table, tapped off the excess water, and slid it calmly into my leather tote bag. A young waitress tentatively approached our table, her hands trembling slightly as she held the checkbook. She had witnessed the entire brutal exchange and looked terrified, probably expecting me to lash out or break down crying. Instead, I gave her a warm, reassuring smile. I pulled out my sleek metal credit card and handed it to her. When she returned with the receipt, I signed it and added a $300 tip on a $50 breakfast tab. She gasped softly when she saw the amount, looking up at me with wide eyes. I just nodded at her, grabbed my coat, and placed my hand gently on Leo's back to guide him out of the building. We stepped out into the crisp morning air, leaving the whispers and stares of the brunch crowd far behind us. We walked a quiet block down the street to where my vehicle was safely parked. From the outside, my dark gray SUV looked completely unassuming, purposefully designed to blend perfectly into the bustling city traffic. But the interior was a private sanctuary of high-end luxury and impenetrable security. I unlocked the heavy doors and we climbed into the quiet leather-scented cabin. The moment the doors clicked shut, completely blocking out the chaotic noise of the city, the tension that had been gripping my son finally broke. Leo dropped his school backpack onto the floorboard and looked over at me from the passenger seat. His dark eyes were wide with genuine fear and lingering anxiety. "Mom," he started, his voice cracking just a little bit, "are they actually going to take our money? Are we going to lose the house?" Jamal said they hired a shark lawyer. "What if they win and we end up on the street?" I reached across the wide center console and gently squeezed his trembling shoulder. I looked at my kind-hearted 15-year-old boy, the center of my universe, and felt a fierce surge of protective energy rush through my veins. I let out a confident laugh that made his tense shoulders drop in relief. "Leo," I said gently but with absolute certainty, "nobody is taking our home. Nobody is taking a single dime. Jamal and Amanda are just incredibly loud. And loud people rely on intimidation because they do not have any real power or intelligence. They are walking blindly into a massive trap, and they are way too blinded by their own toxic greed to see the steel jaws snapping shut around them. You have nothing to worry about. I promise you that we are perfectly safe." He took a deep, shaky breath, nodded slowly, and leaned back into the plush leather seat, trusting me completely. I turned my attention back to the modern dashboard, pressing the button to start the quiet engine. Before pulling out into the busy traffic, I paused and adjusted the rearview mirror. I caught my own intense reflection in the clear glass. The calm, composed face staring back at me was no longer the frightened, homeless 17-year-old girl my family desperately wanted me to be. I am 32 years old now. I survived freezing nights sleeping in my car. I survived working grueling double shifts, waiting tables while carrying a heavy law school backpack. I survived every single malicious obstacle they ever threw in my path. I did not just survive their cruelty, I completely conquered it. I am Kate Bennett, a sitting Superior Court judge in this state, and my family just declared a legal war on the absolute wrong woman. They thought they were handing a subpoena to a weak and easy victim, but they actually just handed a loaded weapon to the person who literally controls the courtroom. If you are ready to watch a group of arrogant, toxic people blindly dig their own legal graves, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel if you believe that the best revenge is not screaming or arguing, but letting your silent success completely destroy the people who tried to bury you. Make sure you stay tuned, because what my greedy family did next crossed a line that forced me to take off the gloves entirely. Let us now get right back into the story. The next morning, my family tried to invade my peaceful sanctuary once again. It was early Monday. I was standing in my walk-in closet selecting a tailored charcoal blazer to wear over my conservative sheath dress. My bedroom was completely silent, a stark contrast to the chaotic circus at the restaurant the day before. As I was buttoning my cuffs, my cell phone buzzed on the marble vanity. The bright screen lit up with a new voicemail notification from a blocked number. I already knew exactly who it was. I tapped the screen, put the phone on speaker, and went back to organizing my leather briefcase for work. A long, heavy sigh echoed through the crisp audio, followed by the deep, falsely gentle voice of my father, Richard. "Kate, sweetheart, it is. Your father," the recording began. He sounded incredibly tired, playing the exhausted peacemaker to absolute perfection. "I know yesterday got a little bit out of hand. You know how passionate your mother and your sister get when they feel betrayed. Jamal is fiercely protective of our family legacy and our financial security. But I am calling you this morning because I want to be the voice of reason here. I want to resolve this quietly just between us before expensive lawyers completely destroy your entire life." I paused, picking up my pearl earrings, and listened intently as my father continued his attempt at psychological manipulation. "We do not want to see you out on the street again, Kate," he said, his voice dripping with fake paternal concern. "We know how incredibly hard it has been for you raising a teenage boy by yourself, with no real college education or marketable skills. We know you are scraping by on minimum wage right now, counting pennies just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. So I talked to the rest of the family last night, and I convinced them to offer you a massive compromise. Just wire us $1.8 million by Wednesday afternoon. We will let you keep the remaining $200,000. Think about it, sweetheart. $200,000 is a fortune for someone in your desperate position. It will pay off your credit card debts and help you secure a tiny apartment in a much safer neighborhood for Leo." I laughed out loud at my own reflection in the tall mirror. My father genuinely believed he was throwing a lifeline to a drowning woman while simultaneously trying to rob her blind. The tone of the voicemail suddenly shifted, dropping the caring facade and revealing the cold, hard, calculating threat underneath. "Now, if you decide to be stubborn about this," Richard continued, his voice growing sharp and deeply menacing, "if you make us drag you into a public courtroom, you need to understand what will happen to you. Our lawyer Bradley is not going to show you an ounce of mercy. He is going to subpoena your employer. He is going to drag your boss into court. He will tell everyone at whatever small diner or retail store you work at that you are a manipulative thief who preys on sick elderly people. He is going to expose your teenage pregnancy, your periods of homelessness, and every humiliating mistake you have ever made. Your friends, your coworkers, and your neighbors are all going to know how disgusting and deceitful you truly are. You will lose your job, Kate. You will lose everything you have. Take the $200,000 and walk away quietly. Do not make me completely destroy you." The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving the large closet in absolute silence once again. I picked up my phone, staring at the screen with a mixture of dark amusement and deep, unwavering pity. My father thought his words were a terrifying weapon. He assumed I was a fragile, uneducated waitress, terrified of losing a minimum wage shift. He had no comprehension of the fact that I was the one who signed the exact type of legal subpoenas he was currently threatening me with. I did not call him back to argue. I did not text him to defend my honor or explain my actual career. Engaging with a toxic narcissist only gives them the ammunition they desperately crave. Instead, I simply tapped the screen a few times, exported the audio file, and securely uploaded it to my encrypted cloud drive. I created a brand new folder on my phone and titled it Exhibit A Extortion Attempt. Then I slipped the phone into my briefcase, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door, ready to go preside over my courtroom and let my father blindly walk right into the legal trap he had just set for himself. By noon that day, my father realized his threatening voicemail had been ignored. Instead of backing down, my family decided to escalate their attacks by taking their malicious campaign public. I had just called a brief recess and stepped back into my private chambers to review a case file when my personal cell phone began vibrating endlessly on my desk. Text messages from 3 of my closest friends, the few people who knew the truth about my toxic family, popped up in rapid succession. They were all sending me the exact same link to a live video currently broadcasting on social media. One message read, "You need to see what Amanda is doing right now." I tapped the screen and opened the application. There was my older sister Amanda sitting in the front seat of her leased luxury car, broadcasting to her thousands of followers. She was using a heavy beauty filter that smoothed her skin but could not completely hide the dark circles of financial stress under her eyes. She was wiping away forced invisible tears with the sleeve of her designer sweater, playing the role of the heartbroken victim with sickening dedication. "Guys, I really need to talk to you all today," Amanda began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "I am just going through something so incredibly devastating right now, and I feel like I have to speak my truth. My family is being ripped apart by pure, unadulterated greed." I sat back in my heavy leather chair, turning the volume up, slightly fascinated by her audacity. Amanda stared directly into the camera and launched into a highly dramatic, entirely fabricated story about her estranged, greedy younger sister. She painted a picture of herself as a devoted granddaughter who had spent years caring for our elderly grandparents, conveniently leaving out the fact that she had not visited them once in their final 5 years. Then, she dropped my name. "My sister Kate is a master manipulator," Amanda sobbed to her audience. "She abandoned this family 15 years ago. She got into a lot of bad trouble, dropped out of school, and completely broke my parents' hearts. And now, she has crawled back out of the woodwork to completely destroy us." Amanda took a deep, dramatic breath before getting to the real motivation behind her public meltdown: the money. "She manipulated our grandparents right before they passed away," Amanda claimed, her voice growing loud and indignant. "She stole a $2 million trust fund that was supposed to secure our family legacy. Jamal and I have been working so hard to build a future for our children. Jamal runs a brilliant crypto real estate business that is on the verge of changing the housing market entirely. We poured our life savings into it. But because the economy is tough right now, we are drowning in credit card debt. That money was meant to be the investment capital Jamal needed to launch his platform. Kate knew that, and she stole it anyway, just to punish us for giving her boundaries when she was a rebellious teenager." The live chat next to the video was moving rapidly. Strangers were leaving angry comments calling me a thief and praising Amanda for her bravery. Amanda soaked up the artificial sympathy like a sponge. She even pinned a link to a crowdfunding page at the bottom of the screen, shamelessly begging her followers to donate money to help save Jamal's failing business and cover their mounting legal fees. She was literally monetizing her own illegal defamation campaign against a sitting judge. I did not feel a single ounce of anger as I watched my sister lie to the world. In the legal profession, we call this a gift. Amanda was publicly broadcasting false, defamatory statements that directly attacked my character and my professional ethics. She was actively soliciting funds under false pretenses. By naming me and publicly accusing me of elder abuse and fraud, she was handing me an open and shut defamation lawsuit on a silver platter. I did not engage with her followers. I did not leave a comment defending myself. The internet is forever, and I wanted this exact copy preserved perfectly. I tapped the screen, recorded the entire broadcast, and saved the video file directly to my secure cloud drive. I opened my encrypted email application, carefully attached the high-resolution video file, and drafted a brief but direct message to my private legal counsel. The email consisted of only 2 sentences. "Please review the attached video for clear evidence of public defamation and fraudulent solicitation. Add this to our growing file for Friday." I pressed send, locked my phone, smoothed the wrinkles from my blazer, and calmly walked back out to my courtroom to finish my afternoon docket. While I was busy handing down rulings from the bench, Jamal decided to take his extortion campaign to a dangerously low level. Since my father's phone call failed and Amanda's internet broadcast provoked no panicked response, Jamal figured he needed to strike at my only vulnerability. He drove his leased sedan across town, parking aggressively outside the chain-link fence of my son's high school. It was late afternoon. Leo was walking alone toward the student parking lot, his heavy gym bag slung over his shoulder. He did not notice the heavy footsteps approaching him until a large hand clamped down hard on his shoulder, spinning him around abruptly. Leo stumbled backward, coming face to face with his uncle. Jamal backed my 15-year-old son against the brick wall of the field house, intentionally blocking Leo from the view of the remaining coaches. "Listen to me very closely, you little brat," Jamal growled, pointing a thick finger directly at Leo's chest. "Your mother thinks she is smart, ignoring our phone calls, but she is playing a dangerous game she cannot win, and you will pay the price." Leo felt his heart pounding against his ribs, but he remembered my strict lessons about handling aggressive bullies. Do not react emotionally. Do not show fear. Document absolutely everything. As Jamal continued his threatening rant, Leo subtly crossed his arms over his chest. With a barely noticeable movement of his wrist, he tapped the screen of his Apple Watch, instantly activating the voice memo recording feature. "What do you want?" Jamal Leo asked, his voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "You are not supposed to be on school property right now. I am here to give you a reality check," Jamal sneered, leaning in so close that Leo could smell his cheap cologne. "Your mother is a common criminal. She stole $2 million that belonged to my wife. She committed massive fraud, and our lawyer is putting together a legal case right now that will put her in federal prison. Do you understand what that means for your future? You will lose your fancy house, your expensive private school, and everything you own. You are going to end up bouncing around dangerous group homes while your mother rots away in a cold jail cell." Jamal grabbed the strap of Leo's gym bag, pulling him closer. "Unless you go home tonight and talk some sense into her," Jamal whispered fiercely. "Tell her to wire the money into my bank account by Wednesday morning. If she fights us in court, I will make sure they lock her away for good. You will be an orphan again." Instead of begging for mercy, my son straightened his posture. He looked directly into Jamal's manic eyes, with the exact same unbothered expression I use when dealing with contemptuous defendants in my courtroom. "Are you quite finished?" Leo asked coldly. Jamal blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the complete lack of terror in the teenager's voice. "What did you just say to me?" Jamal demanded angrily. "I said, 'Are you finished?'" Leo repeated without flinching. "Because my watch is currently recording every single word you just said to me. You are an adult. Trespassing on a public high school campus, physically intimidating a minor, and attempting to extort money through explicit verbal threats. If you do not take your hand off my bag and step exactly 10 feet away from me right now, I am going to scream for Officer Davis, the campus security guard standing right by those bleachers. Then I will happily watch him arrest you for criminal harassment." Jamal froze completely, his wide eyes darting down to the glowing red recording icon on Leo's wrist, then over to the uniformed police officer chatting near the running track. Panic immediately washed over Jamal's sweaty face. He let go of the gym bag as if it had suddenly caught on fire. He took 3 quick steps backward, his chest heaving heavily with frustrated rage. "You and your mother are both completely insane," Jamal hissed venomously. "You really think a stupid audio recording is going to save you? Our lawyer Bradley is going to eat you both alive in court. Enjoy your last few days living in that nice house, kid." Jamal turned on his heel and sprinted back to his parked car, peeling out of the lot in a cowardly rush. Leo stood perfectly still, waited until the sedan disappeared from sight, and stopped the recording. He texted the clear audio file to my secure encrypted number with a simple message that read, "I got him, Mom." Jamal had absolutely no idea that he had just voluntarily handed a sitting judge the exact criminal evidence legally required to put him in handcuffs. After receiving Leo's clear audio file, calm washed over me. My toxic family had crossed the point of no return. I finished my afternoon docket, changed out of my robes, and slipped out the back exit. I drove to the quiet, prestigious law firm of Mr. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy was a meticulous old-school estate attorney in his late 70s. He had handled my grandparents' legal affairs for over 40 years, When I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, he greeted me with a warm, respectful smile that my own parents had never once shown me. "Please have a seat, Kate," Mr. Abernathy said, gesturing to a plush leather chair across from his massive desk. He folded his hands, looking at me with a mixture of immense pride and lingering sadness. "I received the notice that your parents and your sister are officially contesting the trust. I am so sorry they are putting you through this circus." I sat down and crossed my legs, setting my briefcase on the floor. "It is exactly what I expected them to do," I replied smoothly. "My parents are drowning in credit card debt, and Amanda is financing a lifestyle she cannot maintain. They are desperate. But I need to know why my grandparents left everything to me. My parents claim I manipulated them, but the truth is, I had not spoken to my grandparents in over 10 years. I kept my distance because I thought they hated me just as much as my parents did." Mr. Abernathy let out a deep sigh, unlocking his desk drawer. He pulled out a thick file folder and a small sealed envelope. He slid the envelope across the polished wood toward me. "They never hated you, Kate," he said softly. "Your grandparents were heartbroken when your parents kicked you out. But your father threatened to cut them out of his life completely if they tried to help you. They were elderly, afraid of losing their only son, so they watched you from a distance. But they never stopped watching." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a crisp, clear photograph. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of me standing on the stage at my law school graduation holding my diploma. They were there. Mr. Abernathy confirmed, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "They sat in the very back row of the auditorium. They watched you graduate with honors. They followed your entire career. They kept newspaper clippings of your legal victories and your appointment to the bench. When they realized your parents and Amanda were draining their own finances on vanity and foolish investments, your grandparents came into this very office. They changed their will entirely. They wanted their legacy protected by the only person in the family who actually understood the value of hard work, integrity, and the law. They knew exactly the powerful woman you had become." I stared at the photograph, feeling a heavy weight lift off my chest. I was never the discarded mistake my family made me out to be. My grandparents had seen my worth. Mr. Abernathy leaned forward, his expression turning deeply serious as he tapped the legal file on his desk. "But we have a massive problem right now, Kate. Your family hired a man named Bradley to represent them. I know this attorney. He is a vicious, dirty fighter. He does not care about the truth or the law. He only cares about breaking his opponents financially and psychologically. He uses delay tactics, intimidation, and character assassination. He is going to try to starve you out." "What exactly is his first move?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of fear. "He is going to file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning," Mr. Abernathy warned urgently. "He will petition a judge to freeze the entire $2 million trust, and he will likely file a motion to freeze your personal bank accounts as well, claiming you might flee or hide the assets. He wants to cut off your access to money, so you cannot afford to hire a defense attorney. He thinks you are a broke waitress. He wants you panicking and desperate to settle." I looked down at the beautiful photograph of my graduation one last time, gently placed it back into the protective envelope, and securely slid it into my leather purse. Then I took a deep breath and looked directly up at the worried elderly lawyer. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across my face. "I am not going to hire a defense attorney, Mr. Abernathy," I stated calmly. "I am going to represent myself. And as for Bradley starving me out, I welcome the challenge. Let him try to freeze my accounts. He does not know exactly who signs his firm's emergency injunctions." I left Mr. Abernathy's office with a renewed sense of purpose. When I returned to my private chambers at the courthouse the next morning, I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk and pulled out a stack of blank legal forms. Drafting an official response to a civil subpoena is a daunting task for an ordinary citizen, but for a sitting judge it is practically muscle memory. I carefully filled out the required paperwork to officially represent myself. I checked the box labeled Pro C, waiving my right to retain outside counsel. Then I came to the section requesting the defendant's mailing address. I could have listed my private gated community, but I wanted to plant a seed of pure arrogance in my family's minds. So I wrote down the official address of the State Superior Court building in the heart of downtown, listing my specific chamber suite number simply as Suite 402. I signed the document, sealed it in an envelope, and had my clerk send it out via certified mail. I knew exactly how my family would interpret that piece of paper. 2 days later, the certified letter arrived at Amanda and Jamal's overpriced, heavily mortgaged house. Jamal grabbed the envelope from the mail carrier, his eyes lighting up with malicious excitement when he saw my name on the return label. He practically sprinted into their overly decorated living room, where Amanda was busy posing for photos to post on her social media. Jamal tore the envelope open, pulling out the official court response. He scanned the document quickly, his eyes zeroing in on the Pro C designation. Jamal threw his head back and let out a booming, hysterical laugh that echoed off their vaulted ceilings. He tossed the legal papers onto the glass coffee table like a winning lottery ticket. "Just look at this trash," Jamal shouted, pointing at the document while Amanda rushed over to read it. "She cannot even afford a lawyer. She is representing herself, pro se. Do you know what that means? It means she is completely broke. She is probably panicking right now, trying to Google how to survive a civil lawsuit. Bradley is going to absolutely slaughter her in front of the judge." Amanda picked up the paper, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the crisp white edges. A wicked, triumphant smirk spread across her face. "Oh, it gets even better," Amanda sneered, dragging her finger across the address line I had provided. "Look at the return address she used. This is a premium downtown zip code. She actually expects us to believe she lives or works in a luxury high-rise downtown." Jamal leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the address. "Suite 402? He read aloud, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "She is so pathetic. She probably rented one of those cheap virtual mailboxes in a corporate building just to make herself look important on paper. She is trying to intimidate us with a fake business address because she knows she has absolutely nothing else to offer. She thinks we are stupid enough to fall for a fake office suite." They were entirely blinded by their own bloated egos. Instead of Googling the address, which would have instantly revealed it as the State Superior Court, they chose to bask in their fabricated reality. Jamal walked over to their wine rack and pulled out a bottle of cheap sparkling wine, the kind they usually saved for pretending they lived a lavish lifestyle online. He popped the cork, pouring the bubbly liquid into 2 crystal flutes they had bought on clearance. He handed one to my sister. "To the absolute easiest $2 million we will ever make," Jamal toasted, clinking his glass against hers. Amanda took a large sip, already calculating how she would spend the stolen inheritance. "I need to call Mom and Dad right now," she said, eagerly pulling out her phone. "They are going to be so relieved. Dad was actually worried she might have found a pro bono lawyer, but this proves she is completely isolated. We have her cornered." Amanda dialed our parents on speakerphone, relaying the news with gleeful cruelty. Patricia and Richard were ecstatic. Through the phone speaker, my mother laughed her signature cold, dismissive laugh. "I told you she was a failure," Patricia boasted. "She is a dropout playing dress-up. Let her represent herself. It will just make it easier for Bradley to destroy her credibility." They spent the entire evening loudly celebrating their guaranteed win, drinking cheap wine and laughing at my expense. They genuinely believed I was a completely helpless and pathetic victim. Their extreme arrogance was so profound they failed to do any basic research, unknowingly driving themselves straight into a massive legal trap. The delusion my family bathed in did not last very long. When Wednesday afternoon finally arrived and my father checked his bank account, he was furious to find that the $1.8 million wire transfer he demanded had never materialized. Their cheap, sparkling champagne celebration quickly turned into bitter and toxic rage. They realized I was not going to simply roll over and hand them my inheritance. My mother, Patricia, has always been a woman who despises losing control. Whenever she felt someone slipping from her grasp, she resorted to the most destructive, underhanded tactics imaginable. Since financial threats and social media smear campaigns had completely failed to break my spirit, she decided to attack the one thing in this world I valued above all else. She decided to go after my son. It was late Thursday morning. I was sitting at my desk in my private judicial chambers, carefully reviewing a complex corporate litigation file before my afternoon hearings began. The courthouse was quiet, the heavy oak doors shielding me from the noise of the busy hallways. I had my reading glasses on, underlining a specific statute with my favorite silver pen, when my private cell phone suddenly shattered the silence. This was the emergency number I only gave to Leo and the administration at his high school. I picked up the phone immediately, expecting a simple question about a forgotten textbook or an upcoming track meet. Instead, I heard the frantic, trembling voice of Principal Collins. "Judge Bennett," he said, his voice dropping to a hurried whisper. "I am so sorry to interrupt your workday, but we have a very serious situation developing in the front office right now." I sat up straight instantly, abandoning the case file. "What is wrong with Leo? Is he hurt?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "Leo is physically fine," Principal Collins rushed to assure me. "He is sitting right here in my office and he is perfectly safe." "But Kate, there is an investigator from Child Protective Services standing in our reception area right now. She is holding an emergency mandate demanding to interview your son privately." I froze. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. "Child Protective Services," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy tone. "On what grounds?" The principal let out a stressed sigh. "The caseworker claims they received a highly detailed anonymous phone call this morning. The caller reported that you are suffering from severe substance abuse issues. They allege that you and Leo are living in absolute squalor without running water or electricity. The anonymous tipster explicitly stated that Leo is severely neglected, malnourished, and in immediate physical danger living under your care. Because the allegations were so extreme, the agency was forced to dispatch an investigator to the school immediately to assess his safety." My silver pen slipped from my fingers, hitting the mahogany desk with a sharp, echoing clatter. I stared blankly at the polished wood for a fraction of a second as the sheer magnitude of the betrayal washed over me. I knew exactly who made that anonymous phone call. Patricia. She had weaponized a vital government agency designed to protect vulnerable children, all to satisfy her own greedy vendetta. She was actively trying to violently rip my child away from me just to force me into a massive financial settlement. My calm, calculated legal demeanor evaporated instantly. The strategic judge was gone, replaced entirely by a fiercely protective mother who had just watched her enemies cross the ultimate unforgivable line. "Do not let that caseworker speak to my son without my presence," I instructed Principal Collins, my voice dangerously calm and laced with lethal authority. "Keep Leo in your private office. I am leaving the courthouse right now." "I understand, Judge Bennett," the principal replied nervously. "The investigator is insisting on doing a home visit today to verify the living conditions." "Oh, she will absolutely get her home visit," I replied, my eyes narrowing into a deadly glare. "Please inform the caseworker that she is welcome to follow my vehicle to our residence as soon as I arrive at the school. I want her to see exactly where my son lives." I ended the call and stood up from my desk. My hands were not shaking. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a cold, focused fury that radiated through my entire body. My family thought they were playing a clever game of chess, moving pawns to intimidate me. But they had just committed a massive felony by filing a malicious false report with a state agency. They had officially awakened a monster, and I was going to ensure they regretted this decision for the rest of their miserable lives. I drove straight from the downtown courthouse to Leo's high school, my mind calculating every single legal maneuver I was about to execute. When I finally arrived at the front administrative office, Principal Collins quickly introduced me to the waiting Child Protective Services investigator. His name badge read Agent Thomas. He was a stern-looking man, with a thick clipboard, clearly prepared to confront a deeply troubled and negligent mother. I shook his hand, politely refused to answer any preliminary questions in the crowded school hallway, and calmly instructed him to follow my vehicle back to my primary residence. He agreed, assuming we were heading toward a dilapidated neighborhood or a rundown apartment building. Instead, he followed my dark gray SUV out of the city and up into the winding tree-lined hills of the most exclusive neighborhood in the county. I watched him in my rearview mirror as we approached the imposing iron gates of my private community. He had to stop his modest sedan at the guardhouse, roll down his window, and hand over his state identification before the armed security personnel would even allow him to enter the premises. Once inside the iron gates, Agent Thomas followed me down a pristine street lined with massive, architecturally stunning properties. I pulled into the wide, spotless driveway of my own $2 million modern estate. The house featured massive windows, perfectly manicured landscaping, and a quiet, peaceful atmosphere that directly contradicted every single word of the anonymous report. I stepped out of my car, unlocked the heavy custom front door, and gestured for the investigator to come inside. He walked through the entryway, his eyes scanning the immaculate hardwood floors, the vaulted ceilings, and the expensive contemporary artwork hanging on the walls. He looked visibly disoriented. He had been dispatched to rescue a starving teenager from a dangerous drug den without electricity or running water. But he was currently standing in a pristine, climate-controlled luxury home that smelled faintly of expensive vanilla candles and fresh orchids. "Please step into the kitchen," I offered, leading him toward the back of the house. I gestured toward one of the velvet bar stools tucked under a massive gleaming white marble kitchen island. "Would you like a glass of bottled water before we begin?" Agent Thomas shook his head, placing his heavy clipboard onto the pristine marble surface. He cleared his throat desperately, trying to regain his professional footing despite his obvious confusion. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his voice tight, "I am required by law to investigate the claims made in an anonymous tip we received this morning." The caller was extremely specific. "They alleged that you are currently battling a severe substance abuse addiction. They claim that this residence has no functional utilities and that your 15-year-old son is severely malnourished, neglected, and living in squalor." I stood opposite him, resting my hands lightly on the cool stone. I did not gasp in horror. I did not scream at him. I did not desperately try to defend my character or explain my toxic family dynamics. As a legal professional, I knew that getting emotional or defensive with an investigator was the worst possible strategy. I simply maintained intense, unwavering eye contact and allowed him to finish reciting every single absurd lie my mother had fed him over the phone. "These are incredibly serious allegations," Agent Thomas added, his eyes darting around my spotless, fully stocked kitchen as if searching for the invisible squalor. "I need to ask you some direct questions, and then I will need to inspect the entire property, including your son's bedroom and your pantry." "I understand your position completely," I calmly replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "You have a highly critical job to do, and I completely respect the strict protocol your agency must follow whenever a minor is allegedly at risk. However, before you begin your formal interrogation, I think it is crucial that we establish exactly who you are speaking to today." I calmly reached into my tailored leather tote bag and pulled out my official credentials wallet. I flipped it open and placed it flat on the counter. With a deliberate push of my index finger, I slid the leather case across the smooth marble island until it stopped exactly in front of his clipboard. The bright overhead lights caught the gleaming gold of my official state seal. Agent Thomas swallowed hard, leaned forward slightly, and looked down at the dark leather. He saw my state identification card, and right next to it my heavy, solid gold Superior Court Judge badge. His eyes widened instantly, and the color completely drained from his terrified face as he finally realized the absolute catastrophic magnitude of the situation he had just walked into. Agent Thomas stopped breathing for a solid 5 seconds. He stared at the gleaming gold badge resting on the marble island, his eyes darting between the official seal of the State Superior Court and my completely unbothered expression. His hand, which was firmly gripping his clipboard, began to shake visibly. The heavy silence in the pristine kitchen stretched on until he finally managed to swallow the lump in his throat. "Judge Bennett," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I had absolutely no idea. The report came through our emergency anonymous hotline this morning. They flagged it as an immediate priority. I am so deeply sorry for this intrusion." I did not smile, but I kept my tone perfectly even. "You do not need to apologize to me, Agent Thomas," I replied, picking up my badge and sliding it back into my leather tote bag. "You are simply doing your job, and I genuinely appreciate the dedication your agency shows to protecting vulnerable minors. However, you are not here because my son is in danger. You are here because you have been weaponized by a highly malicious family member who is currently attempting to extort $2 million from me in a civil lawsuit." Agent Thomas blinked rapidly, the pieces of the puzzle aggressively slamming into place. He looked around the immaculate $2 million luxury kitchen, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "Someone filed a false report against a sitting judge to gain leverage in a lawsuit," he asked, his voice dripping with shock and professional outrage. "That is a massive felony." "Exactly," I nodded calmly. "My estranged mother, Patricia, and my sister, Amanda, are currently contesting my late grandparents' trust fund. They tried to threaten my career. They tried to harass my son at his high school yesterday. When all of those intimidation tactics completely failed, they resorted to calling your agency to manufacture a crisis. They wanted to terrify me into signing a massive settlement before our court date next week." Agent Thomas set his clipboard down on the marble counter with a heavy thud. His previous stern demeanor completely vanished, replaced by a fierce, focused anger on my behalf. "Filing a false report of child abuse is one of the most disgusting things a person can do," he said firmly. "It pulls critical resources away from children who are actually in grave danger. I cannot even begin to explain how seriously our department takes this kind of malicious behavior." "Then I assume you will have absolutely no problem providing me with the exact origin of that anonymous tip," I stated, leaning slightly forward. "As a judge, I know exactly how your emergency intake systems operate. Every single call is logged, recorded, and tracked. Even if they used an internet-based calling application to hide their caller identification, your cybersecurity division has the immediate capability to pull the exact internet protocol address and the cell phone tower ping from the exact moment that call was placed. I want those records, Agent Thomas. I want the audio recording of the call, and I want the digital footprint proving exactly which device contacted your agency this morning." Agent Thomas did not hesitate for a single second. "I will personally pull the intake logs the minute I get back to my office," he promised. Pulling a pen from his shirt pocket and aggressively flipping to a blank page on his clipboard, he began writing rapidly. "I am officially closing this investigation right now. I am marking this file as an unfounded and malicious false reporting incident. I will request an expedited trace on the incoming phone number and have the complete unredacted file securely delivered to your private chambers by tomorrow morning." I watched him write the official classification, feeling a cold wave of absolute victory wash over me. My mother thought she was being incredibly clever by hiding behind an anonymous hotline. She thought she could throw a grenade into my life and walk away without leaving any fingerprints. Instead, she had just handed me a certified government document proving she committed a severe felony. "Thank you, Agent Thomas," I said, walking him back toward the heavy custom front door. "I will make sure this evidence is put to excellent use in the courtroom." He stepped out onto my immaculate front porch, pausing for a moment, in the warm afternoon sun, shaking his head one last time. "They have absolutely no idea who they are actually messing with right now, do they?" he asked, offering a respectful nod. "No, they truly do not," I replied smoothly. "But they are going to find out very soon. And when that exact moment arrives, I am going to ensure that the entire legal system comes crashing down upon them with absolute perfection." While I was standing in my pristine kitchen securing the exact evidence needed to put them behind bars, my family was busy celebrating their imaginary victory across town. They had booked a table at the most exclusive and ridiculously expensive Michelin star restaurant in the city. Amanda live-streamed their dinner, which is how I knew every pathetic detail of their delusional evening. They walked into the softly lit, elegant dining room, acting like royalty, conquering a small nation. Jamal wore the same tacky designer suit from the cafe, while Amanda had squeezed herself into a new velvet cocktail dress, with the security tag probably still tucked under her arm. My parents trailed behind them, my father puffing his chest out, and my mother looking down her nose at everyone else. They demanded the best table in the house. When the waiter approached with leather-bound menus, Jamal took control to show off. He did not even bother opening the menu. Instead, he leaned back in his plush chair, snapped his fingers, and ordered 2 bottles of the most expensive vintage champagne they carried. The waiter politely informed him that those specific bottles were $400 each. Jamal just laughed loudly, waving his hand in the air. "Bring them out, my man," Jamal boasted, his voice echoing in the quiet, sophisticated room. "We are celebrating a massive incoming windfall. I have a $2 million trust fund clearing the bank by early next week. Money is absolutely no object tonight." Amanda clapped her hands, bouncing in her seat. She leaned across the table toward our mother. "Can you even imagine what Kate is doing right now?" Amanda asked, a vicious smile stretching across her face. Patricia sipped her ice water and smirked. "I know exactly what she is doing," my mother replied coldly. "She is sitting in a sterile interrogation room at her kid's school, crying her eyes out and begging that caseworker not to take her son away. She is probably terrified." Richard chuckled, buttering his artisan bread. "You have to admit, Patricia calling the state agency was a stroke of absolute genius," he praised his wife. "That arrogant little brat needed to be brought down a few pegs. Once they threaten to throw her kid in a group home, she will sign that settlement paperwork so fast her head will spin. She will be begging us to take the money just to make the investigation go away." They spent 2 hours gorging on Wagyu beef, imported caviar, and decadent truffle dishes. They toasted to my supposed misery over and over again. They genuinely believed I was currently having a complete psychological breakdown, losing my child, and frantically trying to figure out how to survive. In their twisted minds, they had already won. The $2 million was already in their bank accounts. Jamal spent half the dinner talking loudly about the new luxury sports car he was going to buy, while Amanda listed the tropical vacations she was planning to book. Then the waiter finally returned to the table, carrying a sleek black leather folder. He placed it quietly in front of Jamal. The total bill for their little delusional celebration was exactly $1,520. Jamal confidently pulled out a flashy platinum credit card and dropped it onto the silver tray. The waiter walked away, only to return 3 minutes later with a very tight, polite smile. "I am so sorry, sir," the waiter whispered discreetly, "but this card has been declined." Jamal turned bright red, nervously clearing his throat as Amanda glared at him. "It must be a fraud alert." Jamal lied smoothly, quickly digging into his wallet for another card. He handed over a second credit card. The waiter returned again. Declined. Panic started to set in at the table. My parents exchanged terrified glances. Richard reluctantly pulled out his own wallet, his hands shaking as he handed over his primary credit card. The waiter ran it. Also declined. They were sweating now, the illusion of extreme wealth completely shattering right there in the middle of the restaurant. They spent 15 minutes frantically shuffling balances on mobile banking applications, quietly arguing with each other. In the end, it took 3 different maxed-out credit cards to cover the cost of their single dinner. They had to split the $1,500 bill 3 ways just to walk out the front door without being arrested for theft. They scurried out of the restaurant in utter humiliation, completely broke and drowning in high-interest debt. But driving home, they comforted themselves with the exact same delusion. It did not matter that they just maxed out their last lines of credit, because by next week, my $2 million would be theirs. It was Friday morning, the final business day before our scheduled pre-trial hearing. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping black coffee, while reviewing the freshly printed file delivered by Child Protective Services. Agent Thomas had kept his absolute professional promise to me during our kitchen meeting. The thick folder contained the audio recording the Internet Protocol address trace and the cell phone tower ping data. It confirmed exactly what I already knew. The call originated from Patricia's cell phone while she was sitting inside her own living room. I placed the documents neatly into my leather briefcase, next to the audio file Leo captured of Jamal. My legal arsenal was complete. I had every single piece of evidence required to send my family to jail and leave them financially ruined. Before allowing the heavy hammer of the justice system to swing down, I decided to make one final phone call. I quickly dialed my estranged mother's number. I did not do this out of lingering affection. I did it because, as a judge, I firmly believe in offering a final chance for a party to correct their course before a catastrophic ruling is handed down. The phone rang 3 times before Patricia answered. Her voice sounded strained, likely a lingering side effect of the massive credit card humiliation she endured at the restaurant the night before. But the moment she realized who was calling, her tone instantly shifted into her signature brand of toxic arrogance. Well, 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 Patricia mocked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Look who is finally crawling back to beg for mercy. Have you had enough fun playing your little legal games, Kate? I deliberately kept my voice entirely devoid of any emotion. I am not calling to beg for anything, Patricia, I stated clearly. I am calling to give you one final opportunity to walk away. Drop the lawsuit right now. Call your expensive lawyer, tell him to cancel the hearing, and never contact my son or me ever again. If you do that, I will let you walk away with whatever is left of your miserable life. But if you refuse, and if we walk into a courtroom on Monday morning, your lives as you know them will be completely over. Patricia let out a loud, malicious laugh that forced me to pull the phone slightly away from my ear. You are absolutely unbelievable, she cackled. You are in no position to issue threats to anyone, you pathetic little dropout. Do you honestly think your empty words frighten me? I know exactly what is happening in your miserable life right now. I know the state investigators came to your house yesterday. I know they saw the absolute squalor you live in. You are probably terrified of losing custody of your son, and you think you can scare me into dropping the case so you can keep the money. She was deeply invested in the fake reality she had constructed. You really are desperate. Kate Patricia continued, her tone growing vicious. You have absolutely nothing. You are a broke, uneducated waitress who tried to pull a fast one on her own flesh and blood. You failed. We hired the best legal representation in the state, and you do not even have a real lawyer. Do you really think a judge is going to listen to a high school failure over a respected, wealthy family like ours? She took a deep breath to deliver her ultimate verbal blow. I am not dropping the lawsuit, she hissed through the speaker. We are taking every single penny of that $2 million. We are going to expose you for the fraud you truly are. And when the judge kicks you out onto the street, nobody is going to come to save you. In fact, you should probably stop by a grocery store this weekend and ask them for a large cardboard box. Bring that cardboard box to court on Monday, Kate, because you are going to be living in one very soon. I did not raise my voice or try to correct her wildly inaccurate assumptions. I had offered her a legitimate chance to save herself from complete destruction, and she aggressively spat in my face. The legal and moral boundaries were now firmly set. I will see you in court on Monday. Patricia, I replied smoothly. I ended the call without waiting for her response. I placed the phone face down on the marble counter, picked up my black leather briefcase, and walked out the door. The trap was now perfectly set. My greedy family blindly locked themselves inside it and eagerly awaited their own devastating financial execution. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about the brutal efficiency of the American legal system. The weekend passed in a state of absolute quiet execution. When Monday morning finally broke, the sky over the city was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I woke up long before the sun crested the horizon, feeling an electric current of anticipation rushing through my veins. Today was the day. I stepped into my master bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the scalding water wash away any lingering traces of stress or hesitation. I was not walking into that courthouse today as a victim, a daughter, or a sister. I was walking in as the undisputed authority they had foolishly decided to challenge. I stepped into my massive walk-in closet, turning on the bright overhead lights. Normally, if a civilian is called to court for a pre-trial civil hearing, they spend hours agonizing over what to wear. They want to look respectful, hoping to impress the judge with a tailored suit or a conservative dress. My eyes briefly scanned the row of expensive civilian blazers, pencil skirts, and silk blouses hanging neatly on the racks. I reached out and ran my fingers over a sharp navy blue jacket, but I quickly pulled my hand away. I bypassed the standard civilian clothes entirely. I did not need to dress to impress the judge today, because the judge presiding over this ridiculous circus already knew exactly who I was. Instead, I walked over to the specialized cedar wardrobe at the back of my closet. I opened the heavy wooden doors and looked at the garment hanging inside, my official state judicial robes. The heavy sweeping black fabric was immaculate, freshly pressed, and carried the profound weight of the law in every single thread. Putting on these robes is a daily ritual I treat with the utmost reverence. It signifies the absolute separation of personal bias and impartial justice. Today, however, that black fabric was going to serve a dual purpose. It was my uniform, but it was also my ultimate weapon. I carefully removed the robes from the cedar hanger and meticulously folded them, ensuring not a single wrinkle marred the pristine black fabric. I placed the folded robes inside a discreet, opaque leather garment bag, zipping it up tightly so no one could see the contents. I set the garment bag next to my heavy leather briefcase, which contained the ironclad evidence that was about to obliterate my family. I chose a simple, understated charcoal gray sheath dress to wear underneath, completely devoid of any flashy designer labels or ostentatious jewelry. I wanted to look exactly like the unassuming, helpless defendant they were expecting to see sitting alone at the defense table. I walked downstairs into the kitchen, the soft clicking of my heels echoing in the quiet house. Leo was already sitting at the kitchen island, eating a bowl of cereal before school. He was dressed in his private school uniform, his backpack resting by the door. He quickly looked up directly at me, his dark eyes deeply searching my face for any sign of fear or anxiety. He knew exactly what today was. "Are you ready for them?" "Mom," Leo asked quietly, setting his spoon down. I walked over and placed a gentle kiss on the top of his head, resting my hand on his shoulder. "I was born ready for this," Leo, I replied, offering him a warm, reassuring smile. "You go to school, focus on your classes, and have a great track practice this afternoon. By the time I pick you up, this entire nightmare will be completely and permanently erased from our lives." He smiled back, the tension leaving his young shoulders. "Kick their butts, Mom," he said with absolute confidence. I grabbed my car keys, my briefcase, and the heavy leather garment bag. I stepped out into the crisp morning air, locking the heavy custom front door behind me. The drive to the downtown courthouse was usually a mundane commute, but today every single mile felt charged with cinematic tension. The city traffic moved in a slow blur around me, while my mind remained razor-sharp and perfectly focused on the upcoming battle. I thought about Jamal and his terribly fake Rolex. I thought about Amanda and her rented designer clothes. I thought about my parents and their incredibly maxed-out credit cards. They were currently waking up across town completely high on their own delusions, eagerly preparing to march blindly into a slaughterhouse they had built with their own greedy hands. The massive collision was finally imminent. The trap was fully locked. I pulled my dark luxury SUV into the private, highly secure underground parking garage, reserved exclusively for sitting judges, shut off the engine, and took one final, incredibly deep breath. The time for showing any mercy was now completely over. While I was safely navigating the quiet underground corridors reserved for judicial staff, My family was making an absolute spectacle of themselves at the crowded public entrance. The lobby of the downtown Superior Court is always a chaotic sea of stressed attorneys, nervous defendants, and exhausted civil servants. It is a place that demands solemn respect, but my family treated it like a cheap reality television premiere. They parked their leased vehicles in a damp public garage 3 blocks away because they refused to pay premium valet rates. By the time they reached the massive stone front steps, they were already loudly complaining. Jamal led the pack, walking with an arrogant swagger that demanded immediate attention. Despite the overcast morning and the dim fluorescent lighting of the massive stone lobby, he was wearing a pair of oversized reflective designer sunglasses indoors. He paired them with a tight, shiny maroon suit that looked entirely out of place among the conservative navy tailoring of the actual legal professionals. Amanda walked closely beside him, aggressively clutching a bright orange Birkin bag. The iconic purse was supposed to project extreme wealth, but the heavy plastic rental tag was still visibly tucked beneath the leather handle. She wore stiletto heels that echoed against the marble floors, stopping every few feet to complain about the line forming at the metal detectors. "Look at this absolute nightmare," Amanda whined loudly, broadcasting her deep disgust to the hundreds of people trapped in the security queue. "Why do we have to stand in line with all these common plebs? We are dealing with a multi-million-dollar federal-level trust fund dispute. We should have been given a private entrance or a VIP escort. This building smells like cheap coffee and desperation." My mother, Patricia, stood right behind Amanda, fanning herself with printed emails. "I know, darling," Patricia agreed sympathetically, glaring at a tired public defender who accidentally bumped into her. "It is insulting. But just remember why we are here. By noon today, we will never have to interact with these types of people ever again. We will have our $2 million, and your pathetic sister will be the one standing in lines like this for the rest of her miserable life." When they finally reached the front of the security line, Jamal decided to turn his routine screening into a theatrical performance. A massive, heavily armed bailiff instructed Jamal to remove his oversized sunglasses, his chunky fake gold watch, and his loud suit jacket before walking through the magnetometer. Jamal scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes as if the basic security protocol was a massive personal insult. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Jamal demanded, leaning over the plastic security bins to intimidate the unimpressed officer. "I am the CEO of a lucrative crypto real estate firm. I do not have time to strip down like a common criminal. I am here to sue a fraudster who stole my inheritance. We are walking out of this dump today with a $2 million judgment. You should be rolling out a red carpet for us, not treating us like street trash." The veteran security officer did not even blink. He had dealt with thousands of arrogant litigants, and Jamal was nothing special. "Sir, take off the sunglasses and the watch, or I will escort you back out to the street myself," the officer replied in a deadpan, authoritative voice. Jamal turned red, muttering insults under his breath as he threw his cheap watch into the plastic bin. Richard, my father, stepped up next, trying to play the dignified patriarch to smooth over Jamal's embarrassing outburst. "You must excuse my son-in-law," Richard told the officer with a condescending smile. "He is just highly protective of our assets. We are dealing with a deeply disturbed individual today. My estranged daughter manipulated her sick grandparents into leaving her a massive fortune. She is an uneducated dropout who thinks she can outsmart the legal system. We hired Bradley, the most expensive attorney in this city, to finally put her exactly where she belongs." The security guards exchanged exhausted glances, ignoring my father's ridiculous monologue. They pushed the plastic bins through the X-ray machine and waved my family through the metal detector. Amanda grabbed her rented orange purse, Jamal snatched his fake watch, and they marched toward the main elevators, completely high on their own fabricated superiority. They genuinely believed that every single person in that courthouse was beneath them. They bragged to the security guards, insulted the public, and proudly declared their intentions to destroy me. They had absolutely no idea that every single employee in that building, from the armed bailiffs at the front door to the clerks operating the elevators, actually worked directly for me. They stepped off the heavy brass elevators onto the fourth floor, completely unaware of the invisible web they were walking into. The fourth floor of the State Superior Court is not designed to make anyone feel comfortable. It is intentionally designed to project absolute authority. The long, echoing hallways are lined with dark mahogany wainscoting and polished marble floors that amplify the sound of every single footstep. Heavy wooden doors with frosted glass panes line the corridor, behind which the most significant legal decisions in the state are handed down daily. The air up here is always perfectly chilled and heavy with silent tension. Regular citizens usually lower their voices to a respectful whisper the moment they step off the elevator, intimidated by the sheer gravity of the environment. My family, however, treated the hallowed halls like a cheap nightclub. Jamal led the way, his dress shoes clicking loudly against the marble as he searched for the assigned courtroom number. Amanda followed closely, her rented designer bag bumping against her hip, while my parents trailed behind, looking around with greedy, wide eyes. They finally reached the heavy double oak doors of courtroom 4B. Jamal pushed the heavy door open with exaggerated force, holding it back so my mother and sister could strut inside. The interior of the courtroom was even more imposing than the hallway. The ceilings were vaulted and lined with acoustic tiles that absorbed any excess noise, creating a stifling, deadened silence. The spectators' gallery consisted of 4 rows of solid oak benches separated from the actual legal arena by a thick wooden gate. Beyond the gate sat the plaintiff and defense tables, positioned meticulously in front of the elevated, massive wooden bench where the presiding judge would soon sit. The American flag hung perfectly still, casting long shadows under the bright lighting. It was a room built exclusively for dispensing brutal, unfiltered truth. My family quickly claimed the entire front row of the gallery directly behind the plaintiff table. They spread out aggressively, taking up space. Amanda placed her bright orange bag on the bench next to her, patting the leather proudly. Patricia crossed her legs, adjusting her posture to look regal and unbothered, while Richard leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy wooden gate. Jamal remained standing for a moment, slowly buttoning his tight maroon suit jacket. He scanned the front of the room, looking for his ultimate target. It only took him a second to find me. I was already seated quietly at the defense table on the right side of the room. I had deliberately chosen to wear my simple, understated charcoal gray blazer over my conservative sheath dress. My judicial robes were currently hanging safely out of sight in the private chambers connected to the back of the courtroom. I had slipped into the room early, sitting in the defendant chair to perfectly play the part of the helpless victim they were expecting. I had my reading glasses resting on the bridge of my nose, and I was casually flipping through a manila case file, completely ignoring the obnoxious commotion my family was making behind me. I looked exactly like an isolated, terrified civilian trying desperately to decipher complex legal documents at the very last minute. Jamal let out a sharp, cruel scoff that echoed clearly across the quiet courtroom. He leaned down, resting his hand heavily on the wooden gate, and whispered loudly to my father Richard. "Look at her," Jamal mocked, pointing a thick finger in my direction. "She is absolutely pathetic. She could not even afford a lawyer. She is sitting there all by herself, pretending to read those papers like she actually understands a single word. We are going to slaughter her." Richard let out a low, rumbling chuckle, his eyes fixed on the back of my head with pure, unadulterated malice. "I told you she would crumble," Richard whispered back, leaning closer to Jamal. "She always was too stubborn for her own good. But today is the day reality finally catches up with her. When the judge sees her sitting there alone, completely unrepresented and clueless, he is going to hand us that $2 million check without a second thought." Amanda leaned forward, joining the toxic huddle. "Just make sure Bradley does not go easy on her," Amanda hissed eagerly. "I want him to make her cry." I want it on the public record that she is a fraud. Jamal smirked, adjusting his shiny cuffs. Oh, do not worry about Bradley. Jamal promised, his voice dripping with venomous anticipation. Bradley does not know the meaning of the word mercy. He is going to walk right through those heavy doors, take one look at that lonely little table, and completely tear her apart, piece by piece. As if Jamal had summoned him with those exact words, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a definitive thud. Every head in the gallery turned to watch the entrance. It was Bradley. You did not need his business card to know exactly who he was and what he did. He radiated the kind of ruthless, predatory energy that only a lawyer who charges $1,000 an hour can successfully project. He was wearing a flawless, custom-tailored Italian suit that draped perfectly over his shoulders, a stark and embarrassing contrast to the cheap maroon fabric tightly squeezing Jamal. A genuine platinum watch gleamed subtly from his left wrist. He walked with a smooth predator stride, his chin tilted up just enough to look down his nose at the entire room. Trailing half a step behind him was a nervous-looking young paralegal struggling to balance two heavy banker boxes filled with legal files. Those boxes were pure theatrical intimidation. This was a standard pretrial hearing that required maybe 10 pages of actual documentation. But Bradley was famous for using shock and awe tactics to completely overwhelm unrepresented defendants. He wanted me to look at those massive boxes and instantly panic, believing he had unearthed thousands of pages of deeply buried secrets about my life. Bradley did not even cast a single glance toward the defense table as he marched down the center aisle. To him, an unrepresented working-class defendant was not a worthy opponent. I was just a minor speed bump on his way to cashing another massive commission check. Bradley stopped directly in front of the wooden gate where my family was sitting. He flashed a brilliant, highly practiced smile that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Good morning, everyone," Bradley said, his voice a rich, booming baritone designed to project authority. He reached over the wooden railing, firmly shaking hands with Jamal and my father before offering a polite nod to my mother and sister. "I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. I know walking into a courthouse can be a stressful experience for most families, but I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show today. We hold absolutely all the cards." Jamal leaned forward eagerly, gripping the wooden gate. "She is sitting right over there," Jamal whispered excitedly, pointing a thumb over his shoulder in my direction. "She is all by herself. She does not even have a cheap public defender." Bradley let out a low, condescending chuckle, straightening his expensive silk tie. "I saw the docket filing on Friday," Bradley replied smoothly, keeping his back entirely turned to me. "Pro se. It is the absolute greatest gift an opposing party can give us. Unrepresented defendants are walking disasters. They do not understand the rules of civil procedure, they do not know how to object properly, and they almost always incriminate themselves within the first 5 minutes of speaking. The judge presiding over this hearing is going to have absolutely zero patience for a pro se litigant wasting the court's valuable time. I am going to file an emergency motion to immediately freeze the trust fund, and then I will petition to freeze her personal checking and savings accounts pending a full financial audit. By lunchtime today, she will not be able to buy a cup of coffee without my explicit written permission." Amanda clapped her hands together silently, a look of pure joy washing over her face. "So, we win today?" Amanda asked eagerly. "We guarantee a massive settlement today," Bradley corrected smoothly, patting his leather briefcase. "Once I freeze her assets and submit the character witness affidavits detailing her troubled past and lack of formal education, she will be begging us to settle just to avoid public humiliation. She will sign the $2 million over to you before the sun goes down. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to prepare my opening statement." Bradley pushed through the swinging wooden gate and confidently strode over to the plaintiff table. He placed his imported leather briefcase on the solid wood surface and popped the gold latches with a satisfying double click. He pulled out a silver laptop, a yellow legal pad, and a Mont Blanc fountain pen. He arranged his items with absolute precision, making sure his cuffs showed exactly half an inch of crisp white fabric beyond his jacket sleeves. His paralegal stacked file boxes on the floor next to him and sat down. Bradley remained entirely focused on his own brilliant reflection in the polished wood. He was so consumed by his own immense arrogance and guaranteed victory that he still had not bothered to look across the aisle to see who he was preparing to destroy. The heavy wooden clock on the back wall of the courtroom ticked loudly, marking the final seconds before the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated reality. At the plaintiff table, Bradley was typing aggressively on his silver laptop, completely absorbed in his own brilliance. Behind him, my family continued their obnoxious whispering. Jamal leaned over the wooden gate, pretending to read the screen of Bradley's laptop, nodding along as if he understood the complex legal jargon. Amanda checked her reflection in her phone, fixing her lipstick for a massive victory celebration. My parents sat back, crossing their arms with matching expressions of toxic satisfaction. They were all completely oblivious to the massive storm gathering right across the aisle. I remained perfectly still at the defense table. I kept my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the manila file resting open in front of me. I listened to the steady, rhythmic tapping of Bradley hitting the keys on his laptop. He was so incredibly confident. He had spent his entire career bullying ordinary people who did not understand the intricate machinery of the justice system. He relied heavily on the psychological warfare of the courtroom, using his expensive suits and aggressive posturing to force unrepresented civilians into terrified submissions. He believed he was the apex predator. He was entirely mistaken. Suddenly, the heavy door located directly behind the elevated judge's bench clicked open. The low hum of conversation in the courtroom immediately died. The bailiff, a tall, imposing man wearing a crisp uniform, stepped forward into the center of the room. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his deep voice leaving no room for hesitation. "The Honorable Judge Robertson presiding. Court is now in session." A wave of movement swept through the room as every single person stood up. The heavy wooden benches in the gallery creaked loudly as my family scrambled to their feet. Jamal hastily buttoned his tight maroon suit jacket. Amanda dropped her phone into her rented bag. At the plaintiff table, Bradley stood up with a practiced fluid motion. He smoothed his custom Italian suit, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and picked up his Mont Blanc fountain pen, fully prepared to deliver a devastating opening statement. Before Judge Robertson even took his seat at the bench, Bradley decided it was the perfect moment to execute his signature intimidation tactic. Stare down the helpless pro se defendant to establish total dominance before the first word is even spoken. I heard the subtle rustle of expensive fabric as Bradley slowly turned his body toward the defense table. He lifted his chin, preparing to unleash a glare designed to shatter the confidence of a desperate, uneducated waitress. He expected to see a terrified, trembling woman clutching a tissue, overwhelmed by the majestic terror of the superior court. I knew exactly what he was doing. Timing is absolutely everything in a courtroom. As Bradley turned his head, I deliberately reached up and pulled my reading glasses down the bridge of my nose. I slowly closed the manila file I had been pretending to study and pushed it aside. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and finally looked directly across the wide aisle. Our eyes met. The reaction was instantaneous and violently physical. It was as if an invisible force had slammed directly into Bradley's chest. The arrogant, predatory gleam in his eyes vanished in a microscopic fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His perfectly styled posture completely collapsed. The blood drained from his face so rapidly that his tanned skin turned a sickly ashen gray. His jaw dropped open, but no sound came out of his throat. He stopped breathing. I did not break eye contact. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the solid wood of the defense table, and folded my hands together. I rested my chin delicately on my knuckles. I did not look angry. I did not look afraid. I looked at the most expensive, ruthless shark lawyer in the city, with absolute quiet authority. Then very slowly, I allowed a chilling, knowing smile to spread across my face. He was scheduled to argue 3 massive corporate lawsuits in my specific courtroom starting next month. He was standing in a public courtroom hired by extortionists aggressively preparing to destroy the life of a sitting superior court judge who held his professional career in the palm of her hand. The heavy gold fountain pen slipped out of his trembling fingers. It hit the polished wooden table with a sharp crack rolling off the edge and clattering onto the floor. He was completely paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare of his own making. The sharp clatter of the gold fountain pen hitting the hardwood floor echoed loudly in the dead silent courtroom. Bradley did not even blink. He did not bend down to retrieve his expensive pen. His hands, which had been confidently adjusting his silk tie just moments before, were now shaking so violently that he had to grip the edges of the plaintiff table just to keep himself standing upright. A thick bead of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. He stared across the aisle at me as if he were looking at a ghost. His pristine legal mind, usually razor-sharp and ready to destroy anyone in his path, had completely short-circuited. Behind him, my family was entirely oblivious to the catastrophic realization paralyzing their high-priced lawyer. Jamal leaned forward over the wooden gate, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He nudged my father, gesturing toward Bradley. "What is he doing?" Jamal hissed loudly, the sound carrying easily in the quiet room. "Tell him to start talking. The judge is waiting." Judge Robertson had indeed taken his seat at the massive elevated wooden bench at the front of the room. He adjusted his microphone and looked down at his daily docket, then peered over his reading glasses. He looked at the plaintiff table, where Bradley was still frozen, gripping the wood with white knuckles. Then Judge Robertson looked across the aisle to the defense table. His stern expression instantly softened into a look of mild surprise, followed by a warm, respectful nod of recognition directed squarely at me. I politely nodded back to the presiding judge, acknowledging my senior colleague, before returning my unwavering gaze to the terrified man standing across the aisle. Amanda let out an impatient sigh. She reached over the wooden railing and actually poked Bradley sharply in the back of his expensive custom jacket. "Go on, Bradley," Amanda loudly whispered, her voice dripping with toxic entitlement. "Destroy her. Tell the judge she is a broke fraud. We are paying you $1,000 an hour to talk, so start talking." The sharp poke from my sister finally snapped Bradley out of his frozen trance, but it did not spur him into the aggressive legal attack my family was eagerly anticipating. Instead, it sent him into a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. He jerked away from Amanda's touch, as if she had just burned him with a hot iron. He frantically shoved his chair backward, creating as much physical distance between himself and my toxic family as possible. He looked at them with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound terror, realizing that the arrogant people sitting in the front row had just tricked him into committing professional suicide. "Mr. Bradley, Judge Robertson," prompted his deep voice, cutting through the rising tension in the room. "You requested this emergency hearing. Are you prepared to proceed with your opening remarks, or do you need a moment to collect your dropped pen?" Bradley swallowed hard. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He did not look up at Judge Robertson. He could not tear his terrified eyes away from me. Slowly, painfully, he let go of the plaintiff table. His hands were visibly trembling as he took a tentative step out from behind the wooden podium. He did not project the booming, confident baritone voice he had bragged about in the lobby. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice was nothing more than a weak, shaking whisper. "Good morning, Judge Bennett," Bradley stammered, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of absolute, undeniable submission. "I had no idea you were the defendant in this matter. My firm was not fully aware of your identity when we accepted this case." The entire courtroom seemed to stop spinning. The heavy silence that followed his words was absolute and suffocating. The air was sucked right out of the room. Behind the wooden gate, the smug, triumphant expressions on the faces of my family members were instantly wiped away, replaced by blank, uncomprehending stares. Jamal froze with his mouth hanging half open. Amanda slowly lowered her rented orange bag to her lap, her perfectly manicured fingers suddenly going limp. My mother, Patricia, gripped the wooden railing so tightly her knuckles turned pale white. her eyes darting frantically between my calm-seated figure and the trembling, terrified lawyer they had hired to destroy me. Richard just stared straight ahead, his brain completely unable to process the words he had just heard. Wait, did he just actually call her Judge Bennett? Jamal muttered under his breath, his voice cracking with absolute panic. They were completely paralyzed with confusion. The reality they had so carefully constructed had just shattered into a million pieces. Amanda was the first to physically react to the impossible title that had just echoed through the silent courtroom. She leaned sharply over the heavy wooden gate, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into the fabric of Bradley's expensive suit jacket. "What are you doing?" Amanda hissed, her voice, a toxic mixture of desperate denial and rising fury. "Get up and do your job. She is not a judge. She is a high school dropout who got pregnant at 17. She works in a diner. Stop playing around and tell the court that she is a massive fraud." Bradley ripped his shoulder away from her grip so violently that he nearly knocked his paralegal to the floor. The polished, arrogant predator who had strutted down the center aisle minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a man staring directly into the abyss of his own destroyed career. He spun around to face my family, his face flushed with terrifying, unhinged rage. He leaned down over the wooden railing, completely ignoring basic courtroom decorum, and got right into Amanda's face. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Bradley furiously whispered back, his voice shaking with absolute venom. "Are you all completely insane? Do you have any idea what you have just done to me? You lied to me. You sat in my office, drank my sparkling water, and handed me a fabricated story about a broke waitress. You led me blindly into a slaughterhouse." Jamal tried to intervene, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to regain control of the crumbling situation. "Hey, watch how you speak to my wife," Jamal warned weakly. "We are paying you $1,000 an hour to win this case, not to have a nervous breakdown in the middle of a hearing. Just look at her. Does she look like a judge to you?" Bradley looked as if he was going to physically attack Jamal right there in the gallery. He grabbed the lapels of his own custom Italian suit, his breathing ragged and shallow. "She does not just look like a judge, you ignorant fool!" Bradley snarled, his spit flying onto Jamal's cheap maroon jacket. "That woman sitting completely unbothered across the aisle is the Honorable Kate Bennett. She is the youngest Superior Court judge in the entire state. She is the most brilliant legal mind in this district. She runs this building. My father—" Richard finally found his voice, though it was barely a dry croak. "That is impossible," Richard muttered, shaking his head rapidly as if he could physically reject the reality unfolding in front of him. "She barely finished high school. She was homeless. We threw her out. There is absolutely no way she climbed to the top of the judicial system." "You are mistaken, Bradley. Look at the paperwork." "I am not mistaken," Bradley hissed, slamming his trembling hand down onto the wooden gate. "I know exactly who she is because my entire livelihood currently depends on her. Judge Bennett is actively presiding over 3 of my firm's largest corporate litigation cases. We are talking about multi-million-dollar class action lawsuits. Cases that determine the financial survival of my entire law firm. She holds the power to completely destroy my career, and you absolute morons just hired me to file an extortive lawsuit against her. You made me threaten a sitting judge." The sheer gravity of Bradley's words finally crashed down upon my family like a suffocating avalanche. Patricia sank back into the hard wooden bench, all the color draining from her heavily made-up face. Amanda covered her mouth with both hands, her rented designer bag slipping off her lap and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Jamal suddenly looked incredibly small, his fake gold watch gleaming pathetically under the harsh fluorescent lights. They had spent the entire last week actively harassing, mercilessly threatening, and viciously defaming a powerful woman who literally commanded the absolute highest level of legal authority in the entire state today, without even realizing it. "This is professional suicide," Bradley gasped, stepping back from the railing and running a shaking hand through his perfectly styled hair. "If the State Bar Association finds out I filed an aggressive civil suit against a Superior Court judge, Based on the vindictive lies of a bankrupt family, they will strip me of my license. I am completely ruined. I am done. Bradley turned his back on his former clients, completely abandoning them to their fate, leaving them suffocating in their own panicked realization. He slowly looked up at the elevated bench where Judge Robertson was watching the entire dramatic meltdown with narrowed, furious eyes. Bradley knew that he simply could not escape. He had to face the catastrophic consequences of his very own monumental arrogance. Judge Robertson leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the polished mahogany of the elevated bench. He was a veteran of the state judicial system, a man who had spent over 40 years presiding over complex civil litigation and criminal trials. He possessed a terrifyingly sharp intellect and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and looked down at the chaotic scene unfolding before him. He had watched the entire explosive exchange between the high-priced lawyer and the arrogant gallery. Now the absolute silence in the room was deafening. He slowly picked up the thick stack of emergency motions Bradley had aggressively filed just hours prior. He flipped through the crisp white pages of the legal documents, the sharp rustle of the thick paper sounding like a rapid series of gunshots echoing off the high ceiling. He did not look amused. He looked profoundly offended. Counselor Bradley Judge Robertson finally began, his deep voice acting like a low, rumbling thunder that immediately demanded absolute compliance. I am currently holding a formal petition for an emergency injunction. A petition demanding the immediate freezing of a $2 million trust fund, along with a request to freeze the personal banking accounts of the defendant. A defendant you claim is a severe flight risk, an unemployed fraudster, and a danger to her own minor child. Judge Robertson let the heavy manila file drop onto his desk with a loud, dismissive thud. He slowly shifted his piercing gaze away from the paperwork and locked eyes with the trembling attorney standing below him. I have known Judge Bennett for 5 years. I have watched her preside over some of the most complex, high-stakes litigation this state has ever seen. She is a pillar of legal ethics and a dedicated public servant. Judge Robertson shifted his gaze past the sweating attorney and looked directly at the front row of the gallery. His eyes slowly swept over Jamal, sweating in his tight maroon suit, Amanda aggressively clutching her rented orange bag, and my parents Richard and Patricia, who were now shrinking back into the wooden bench. The veteran judge did not try to mask his absolute disgust. He looked at them as if he had just discovered a nest of venomous snakes hiding inside his chambers. It is not entirely uncommon for greedy, vindictive family members to manipulate the legal system in an attempt to extort money from successful relatives. Judge Robertson stated coldly, making sure every single syllable echoed through the room. Civil courts deal with petty jealousy and financial desperation every single day. But it is exceptionally rare to see an extortion attempt executed with such breathtaking, undeniable stupidity. Judge Robertson turned his lethal attention back to the plaintiff table. He pointed a single weathered finger directly at Bradley. What I want to know, counselor, is how a senior partner at a prestigious downtown law firm allowed himself to be weaponized by a group of blatant opportunists. Did you thoroughly vet this filing, Mr. Bradley? Did you conduct even a basic background check on the defendant before marching into my courtroom and demanding I freeze the assets of a sitting superior court judge, or did you simply smell blood in the water, see a $2 million trust fund, and file this frivolous, insulting waste of the court's time without a single shred of due diligence? Bradley looked exactly as if he was about to physically collapse. The custom Italian suit that had fit him perfectly 10 minutes ago suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. Sweat poured down his temples, soaking the crisp collar of his expensive dress shirt. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a desperate, raspy wheeze escaped his throat. He cleared his throat violently, his panicked, wide eyes darting frantically between the imposing figure of Judge Robertson and the heavy oak doors securely closed at the very back of the room, looking exactly like a trapped wild animal, desperately calculating an impossible escape route out of a cage. Your Honor. Bradley finally choked out his voice, practically unrecognizable. I was completely misled. My firm was intentionally deceived by our clients regarding the fundamental facts of this dispute. We were provided with fraudulent narratives and manipulated family histories. I take full responsibility for the catastrophic failure of my intake department, but I cannot, in good conscience or ethical standing, proceed with this litigation today. Bradley took a step backward, physically distancing himself from the plaintiff table and the family sitting behind it. I am officially requesting the court's permission to immediately withdraw as counsel of record for the plaintiffs effective this very second. I simply cannot represent these incredibly deceptive individuals anymore. Judge Robertson stared at the disgraced attorney for a long moment before giving a single sharp nod. "Your motion to withdraw is granted, Mr. Bradley," the judge stated coldly. "Step away from the plaintiff table immediately and take a seat in the back of the gallery. Do not leave this building. We will be discussing your professional sanctions regarding this frivolous filing in my private chambers once this hearing concludes." Bradley did not argue. He grabbed his briefcase and sprinted toward the back row, leaving my family completely exposed and undefended in the center of the room. The absolute silence that followed was heavy with impending doom. My parents, Amanda and Jamal, sat frozen, staring at the empty table in front of them. They had no lawyer, they had no case, they had absolutely no idea how to navigate the complex legal arena they had so arrogantly forced me into. I calmly pushed my chair back and stood up from the defense table. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat or smirk. I simply buttoned my charcoal gray blazer, picked up my leather briefcase, and walked slowly toward the center podium. The sound of my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor was the only noise in the massive courtroom. I placed my briefcase on the podium, snapped open the gold latches, and pulled out 3 carefully organized file folders. "Your Honor." I began projecting my voice with the lethal practiced precision of a seasoned judge. "I am respectfully requesting that the plaintiff's petition for an emergency injunction be dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am submitting 3 pieces of physical and digital evidence into the official court record to demonstrate that this lawsuit is not merely a frivolous civil dispute, but a coordinated criminal extortion campaign designed to terrorize me and my minor child." I opened the first folder and slid a thick stack of notarized documents across the bench toward Judge Robertson. Exhibit A is the original unmodified trust agreement executed by my late grandparents, I explained clearly. As the court will plainly see, the documents were drafted and witnessed by a senior partner at Abernathy and Associates. The trust includes a specialized ironclad competency clause signed by 2 independent board-certified neurologists on the exact day the will was amended. My grandparents were in perfect cognitive health. The plaintiff's claims of elder abuse and manipulation are entirely fabricated, and they have absolutely no legal standing to contest this document. I heard a sharp intake of breath from my father in the gallery, but I did not even glance in his direction. I opened the second folder and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. "Exhibit B." I continued, my voice dropping to a colder, more dangerous register. "This contains a clear, unedited audio recording captured just last week. It features the plaintiff's husband, Jamal, trespassing on the grounds of a public high school to physically corner and threaten my 15-year-old son, Leo. On this recording, Jamal explicitly threatens to have me sent to federal prison and promises to have my son placed into a dangerous group home unless I wire $1.8 million directly into his personal bank account by Wednesday morning. This is textbook criminal extortion harassment of a minor and terroristic threatening." Jamal slumped down into the wooden bench behind me, his fake Rolex catching the light as he buried his sweating face in his shaking hands. Amanda sat entirely paralyzed next to him, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror as she finally realized her husband was going to jail. I opened the third and final folder, pulling out the official state agency report I received from Agent Thomas. And finally, Exhibit C. I announced, turning slightly so my mother Patricia could see the state seal printed on the cover. This is an official incident report from the Department of Child Protective Services, accompanied by the corresponding Cybercrimes Division trace. Yesterday morning, my mother deliberately filed a false anonymous report claiming I was severely abusing drugs and neglecting my child in a home without electricity or running water. The state agency traced the internet protocol address and the cell phone tower pinged directly back to Patricia's living room. She weaponized a government child welfare agency to inflict psychological terror and gain leverage in this fabricated lawsuit. Filing a malicious false report regarding child abuse is a severe felony in this state. I placed the final document onto the judge's bench. I stood tall, my posture perfect, and looked directly into the eyes of the veteran judge. The plaintiffs did not bring a legitimate legal dispute to this courthouse today, Your Honor. They brought a vicious, coordinated criminal conspiracy. The courtroom was dead silent. The trap snapped shut. Judge Robertson picked up the official state agency report and the sleek silver flash drive. He did not even need to plug the drive into his computer right this second to verify my claims. The certified police trace resting on his desk and my impeccable judicial reputation were more than enough to instantly seal their miserable fate. He slowly removed his silver-rimmed glasses, placing them carefully next to his wooden gavel. When he finally spoke, his voice was a terrifying, thunderous boom that seemed to physically shake the heavy oak walls of the courtroom. In my 40 years on the bench, I have presided over murders, massive corporate frauds, and horrific acts of violence. Judge Robertson began, his eyes locked onto my shrinking, terrified family. But I have rarely witnessed a display of such profound, sickening arrogance and sheer stupidity as the one you have brought into my courtroom today. You did not just file a frivolous lawsuit. You weaponized the justice system, you terrorized a minor, and you attempted to extort a respected public servant. This court finds your petition to be not only entirely baseless, but maliciously fabricated, Judge Robertson declared, picking up his wooden gavel. This civil case is officially dismissed with extreme prejudice. You are permanently barred from ever filing another claim against this estate or this defendant in the state. But we are far from finished here today. My father, Richard, swallowed hard, his face pale and sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. Filing a frivolous lawsuit designed to harass and extort carries severe financial penalties, the judge continued mercilessly. I am ordering the plaintiffs to immediately pay all court costs, administrative fees, and maximum punitive sanctions. Furthermore, although the defendant represented herself, she is entitled to compensation for the sheer volume of billable hours this malicious defense required. I am ordering you to pay a total of $150,000 in legal sanctions and penalties. This judgment is effective immediately. If you fail to produce these funds, I will authorize the immediate garnishment of your wages and place aggressive liens on your homes and vehicles. A collective gasp echoed from the gallery. They had just maxed out 3 different credit cards simply to buy a single extravagant dinner the night before. Now they were legally bound to pay $150,000 they absolutely did not possess. Their fake luxury lifestyle was officially destroyed, reduced to ashes by a single strike of a wooden gavel. But the devastating financial ruin was only the beginning of their punishment. Judge Robertson turned his lethal gaze directly toward Jamal, who was currently trying to slide down into the hard wooden bench and make himself invisible. Mr. Mitchell. Judge Robertson barked, causing Jamal to physically jump in his seat. This is a civil court, but I am a sworn officer of the law. I have been presented with certified evidence of severe criminal misconduct, including the terroristic threatening of a minor and criminal extortion. I will be forwarding this entire file, including the audio recording and the cybercrimes trace, directly to the district attorney for immediate felony prosecution. However, given the explicit threats you made to a 15-year-old boy on public school property, I find you to be an immediate and active danger to the community. Judge Robertson did not even hesitate. He simply raised his hand and gestured toward the back of the room. Bailiffs, take that man into custody right now. The two massive, heavily armed security officers, who had been standing quietly by the heavy oak doors, instantly sprang into action. They marched down the center aisle, their heavy boots thudding aggressively against the polished marble floor. Jamal scrambled backward, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He practically climbed over my father in a desperate, pathetic attempt to escape the inevitable. "Wait! No! You cannot do this!" Jamal shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I am a CEO. I have a crypto business. You cannot arrest me." The officers did not care about his imaginary business or his delusional status. One bailiff grabbed Jamal by the collar of his tight maroon suit jacket, violently hauling him over the wooden gate. The cheap fabric of the jacket ripped audibly at the shoulder seam. The second officer grabbed Jamal's wrists, forcing them roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely over Jamal's fake gold watch echoed clearly through the silent courtroom. Amanda erupted into pure hysteria. She leaped up from the wooden bench, dropping her rented orange purse onto the floor where it was immediately trampled by the struggling officers. Amanda screamed at the top of her lungs, black mascara tears ruining her heavy makeup, as she watched her husband being treated like a common criminal. "Let him go right now. He did not do anything wrong. Kate is lying. She is a liar." Judge Robertson slammed his gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. "One more word out of you, young lady, and I will have you arrested for contempt of court and seat you in a holding cell right next to him," the judge roared. Amanda instantly clamped her hands over her mouth, sobbing violently but terrified to make another sound. She watched in absolute horror as the bailiffs dragged her crying, handcuffed husband down the center aisle and out the heavy oak doors. My parents sat completely frozen in shock. In less than 10 minutes, their arrogant illusion of power and wealth had been completely obliterated. I did not linger to watch my parents process their utter destruction. I calmly closed my leather briefcase, snapped the gold latches shut, and picked it up from the defense table. I offered one final respectful nod to Judge Robertson, who returned the gesture with a look of quiet professional solidarity. I turned on my heel and walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking with a steady, victorious rhythm. I did not look left or right as I passed the wooden benches, where my mother and father remained frozen in absolute terrified shock. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool, quiet mahogany hallway of the 4th floor. I had barely taken 10 steps toward the private judge's elevators when I heard the frantic, desperate clicking of my mother's shoes rushing up behind me. "Kate, please wait," Patricia called out, her voice entirely stripped of its usual toxic arrogance. It was a raw, pathetic sound. I stopped and turned slowly. Patricia practically stumbled toward me, with Richard trailing a few paces behind her, looking like a completely broken man. The cruel, mocking woman who had just laughed at the thought of me living in a cardboard box was completely gone. In her place stood a terrified, aging woman who had just realized she was facing $150,000 in legal sanctions and absolute social ruin. Real desperate tears were finally streaming down her heavily powdered cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. "Kate, please, you cannot let him do this to us," Patricia begged, reaching out a trembling hand as if to touch my arm. "We are bankrupt. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. You have to tell the judge to drop the financial penalties. Jamal was just being stupid, but we are still family. We are still your parents. We can fix this." I looked down at her outstretched hand and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, and certainly no obligation. I did not step back, but my glare was so intensely cold that she slowly pulled her hand away, shrinking back into her own miserable defeat. "We are not family, Patricia," I stated, my voice echoing with lethal, unwavering finality in the empty corridor. "You lost your daughter 15 years ago when you threw a terrified 17-year-old girl out into the freezing snow. You watched me drive away with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes, and you never looked back to see if I survived. The helpless girl you discarded died in that freezing car a long, long time ago. I am Judge Catherine Bennett, And you will never speak to my son or me ever again. If you ever come near my home, my courtroom, or my child, I will not just sue you, I will legally bury you. I turned my back on them for the absolute last time. I did not listen to Patricia breaking down into loud, hysterical sobs behind me. I did not care that Richard was desperately trying to hush her while completely panicking about their impending financial doom. I walked straight to the secure VIP elevator, swiped my judicial badge, and descended into the private underground parking garage. When I reached my dark gray luxury SUV, I unlocked the heavy doors and tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat. I stood there for a moment in the quiet, climate-controlled garage and took a massive, deep breath. The air had never felt so incredibly clean. The heavy, suffocating chain that my toxic relatives had wrapped around my neck for my entire life was finally shattered into dust. I realized right then that true family is never determined by shared blood or a genetic lottery. True family is built entirely on mutual respect, unwavering support, and unconditional love. I had built my real family with Leo, and no one was ever going to threaten our peace again. I climbed into the plush leather driver's seat, started the quiet engine, and looked directly into the rearview mirror. I am talking directly to you now. If you are currently sitting in the dark, feeling trapped by toxic family members who constantly diminish your worth and demand your submission, I need you to listen to me very closely. You do not owe anyone your sanity just because you share their last name. You have the absolute power to walk away, rebuild your life, and become so undeniably successful that your very existence becomes their greatest punishment. Let them laugh at your struggles now because they will absolutely choke on your success later. Stand up, set your iron boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your own peace. If my story gave you the strength to finally cut off the toxic weight holding you down, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel to join a community of survivors who refuse to be victims. Stay strong, keep building your empire in silence, and I will see you all in the next video.